Capitol Report is a production of Senate Media Services.
On this week's program, we focus on changing demographics in education and how the combination of retiring baby boomers and increasing diversity is shaping Minnesota's future. Stay tuned for this and more on this week's Capitol Report. Welcome to this week's program. I'm Shannon Loehrke. In our second of a two-part series on changing demographics, we focus on the field of education, and to provide a framework for that discussion, we begin with our state's demographer, Susan Brower. People who like puzzles may relish the intricacies inherent in tackling the changing demographics conundrum, as the coming decades will bring about unprecedented change in Minnesota. Consequences of the shift to an older population, increased diversity among the younger generation, and a tight labor market conspire together to possibly reduce tax receipts and create further challenges for education and health and human services funding.
Some of these changes that we've talked about are going to continue to unfold whether or not we're ready for them. And I think in some ways we've talked about aging for so long, for so many decades, and Tom Gillespie before me for decades has talked about the age wave that's coming, that we kind of either think it's too big or kind of shut down in terms of how we need to respond. And I think there's still plenty of time to be able to do planning for what we know is going to happen. And so I would just urge folks to be considering how it is we want to respond to these changes that we know are going to happen.
According to the state demographer's website, Minnesotans born today are more likely to racially identify as children of color and have more influences from other communities around the world than at any other time in our state's history. In 2014, 28% of the babies born in Minnesota were either Hispanic and/or a race other than white.
The increase in racial and ethnic diversity that's happened in Minnesota has largely been since 1990. That's when kind of the pace of growth for populations of color really picked up in Minnesota. A lot of what is driving that has been increased immigration to Minnesota from all around the globe. So it's not a single group or a single flow of immigrants. It's really part of a larger global pattern where you see more migration for everyone across the U.S., not just Minnesota. So that has really driven the increase in diversity. And then we've seen, our populations of color grow rapidly from birth. So we see young people move here. People tend to move when they're in their 20s and just about to be parents, or they are parents, and then they have children. And so that increases our racial and ethnic diversity kind of in two ways.
As these newest Minnesotans enter the public education system, increased cultural competency and tailored approaches may be needed to successfully educate the future workforce. The January 2016 State Demographer's Report on the Status of Minnesotans documents the poorer outcomes in education and health experienced by populations of color. In that light, the tightening of the labor market due to the retiring of the baby boom generation highlights the importance of addressing racial and economic disparities for communities of color.
We need to be really very careful about very cognizant and focused on developing the people that we do have. So we don't have room to have people marginalized. Education becomes very important. We don't have room in this very tight labor market and very slow growing labor force to have people who aren't skilled up to their fullest potential. And so I think that's kind of the other side of these demographic changes. And it's going to be a neat trick to figure out how to do it at the same time that we're feeling these budget pressures from the aging baby boomers.
Today's public schools are facing extraordinary challenges due to the wave of retiring teachers, the racial and ethnic diversity of today's youth, and the ongoing struggle for sufficient resources. Joining me in the studio is Department of Education Commissioner Brenda Cassellius. Welcome, Commissioner.
Thank you, Shannon.
How will the wave of baby boomer retirements affect the teaching profession?
Well, already we have a teacher shortage in Minnesota, and we've for several years had a really concerning teacher shortage.
In certain areas in particular.
Yeah, math and special education, some of the sciences, for English language learner teachers. So really in a lot of our special populations where we have larger achievement gaps. So we think that if we're not able to get really great teachers, that we really could have a problem with meeting the needs and delivering an excellent education for all the children in Minnesota, especially as we become more diverse.
There's a concern about the loss of institutional knowledge also once this generation of teachers retires. Are there mentoring systems in place for the younger teachers, and what's being done to encourage more people to be teachers?
There has been some legislation around induction programs. That means kind of the onboarding of new teachers. We also just passed a new funding source to give student teachers some stipends for their teaching experience, and we think that will help encourage more teachers to go into the field. Some tuition reimbursement for out-of-field folks to come in and become teachers, and then some grow your own programs in districts. So this past session we really tried to make a start on an effort with the state response to increasing the number of teachers in the state.
Diversity has been increasing since the 90s and will continue to increase. And we in Minnesota have one of the largest achievement gaps in the country. The latest test scores show very little change.
Yeah.
What more needs to be done?
Well, you know, first I'd like to say that you can't measure everything in a test score. But besides that, even if teachers are using their own grades, we know that there are children who are behind and who have been stuck in these unacceptable disparities for a long time, and it's really about opportunities that students don't have. So one of the signature items for the governor over the past terms has been early learning, so that all kids get a great start. Also assuring that students are reading on grade level by 3rd grade, and then giving them the social and emotional supports with students, social workers, counselors, and other interventions early for children and families. So I think this is going to be kind of a double-edged effort here with doing some in-school focus around resources with the money we already have and reprioritizing that. Some additional resources that are needed for some support helps with counselors and social workers and the such, and preschool. I think that those things are going to help, but those are long-term payoffs. And then the second part is I'm becoming increasingly convinced that families are just really struggling out there. And so I think we need additional mental health supports for families. We need additional housing supports, jobs, good wage-paying jobs for families to have stable incomes so that they can provide opportunities that affluent families are able to provide for their children before they even get to school. So I think that it's kind of this all-hands-on-deck approach.
There was recently in the Star Tribune a graph that showed the test scores for students in poverty versus students not in poverty, besides just the various racial breakdown. And it was significant. So poverty and homelessness do seem to play into these test scores. How do we as a society address that?
Well, one, within communities we can help out our neighbors, right? And so just as a very individual level, we can help our neighbors and be more neighborly. Minnesotans typically are very neighborly. I think second is city and county alignment with state resources as well is really important, especially when there's scarcity of resources. Making sure there's not duplication of effort around social services so that really all families are getting the needed help that they deserve and will help them be good contributing citizens. And our transformation zones are doing that, like on the Northside Achievement Zone or the St. Paul Promise neighborhood, or in Northfield, our transformation zone there are some really early interventions of alignment of systems, state and all governmental systems. So we're hoping that that will kind of take hold and start producing some results. But again, we're really working on the pipeline here. If we look at seniors from last year, most of their entire career in high school and in elementary school has been during cuts. I mean, we borrowed $2.8 billion from schools. And so do we really expect kids to be doing better when we've been giving them less over the past decade before this administration came on board? Now, the governor said every year he's governor, he'll put more money in education, no exceptions, no excuses. And he has done that through instituting all-day K, paying back the school shift, investing more money on the per pupil, $1.2 billion, investing in third grade literacy initiatives, you know. So there's a lot that we've done. But as you can see, it's still not being measured on the test result because most of those investments have been at the early grades.
And so these are long-term investments, and
Yes.
the governor we do have all-day kindergarten now. We do have pre-K for
Right.
4-year-olds that's rolling out this fall, is that
yes,
correct?
but not for everybody. So we had to say no to 101 schools that wanted it, and also 7,000 students. And so that was just in a demand that was a very short timeline for school districts. And so school districts, there's many more who would want it if we were able to make the investment.
So we'll stay tuned
Yeah.
for the future. Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
As we consider the ways in which retiring baby boomers will affect the workforce and the economy, we must also consider how to meet the needs of our increasingly diverse youth. Joining me in the studio to provide his perspective on these changing demographics is Senator John Hoffman of Champlin. Welcome, Senator.
Hey, thanks for having me here. It's good to be here.
The state demographer is talking about a tighter workforce. We've had plenty of reports about the disparity in economics based on racial backgrounds of students. So moving forward, tight labor market, how are we going to continue to educate the future workforce and have them be able to take over as these baby boomers retire?
It's a great question. Actually, there's a great 3, 4, 5 questions within that statement. And I think it all starts where we set our priorities as a Senate. Democrat senators set the priorities early on in 2013 with all-day, everyday kindergarten, which the whole state, the governor signed into law, and in the discussion about the early childhood world, especially the preschool conversation, and allowing
Being
the
kindergarten ready.
Kindergarten ready,
Yeah.
because what the folks were saying in elementary that we got youth coming through kindergarten, they're not even ready to learn to read. And you know, when you're looking at benchmarks that need to be set, whether it be reading or math, having an investment in all-day, everyday kindergarten, we saw after the first year, the benchmarks in first, second, and third grade within districts start to move, regardless of the factor of the economic disparity or not, that these kiddos were ready to go. So you started to see that achievement gap starting to close right away where they were moving benchmarks. That's huge. There's still, folks, based upon, if you look at the income disparity that's there, income is a huge factor when it comes to leveling the playing field. And you got a youth that's coming in that still isn't ready for kindergarten or ready for first, second, and third grade. You know that if they're not with their peers moving in the succession that needs to be by the time they graduate or don't graduate, they're not going to be ready for work, they're not going to be ready for school, they're not going to be ready for taking on the next step. I believe our investments are starting to pay off, and you're going to see the long-term investment pay off. Our priorities as the Senate, DFL, and as the governor has stated, were to get those investments on early. And you start to see, like, for example, I served on the Anoka School Board for 8 years, the last 3 as its vice chair, and we saw demographic change. When I first started, you know, the free and reduced population was right around wavering at 20%. I think when I left, it had almost doubled. Those numbers had almost doubled. And yet we started to close the achievement gap to 11% because we were starting to focus on, and I can talk a little bit more about compensatory education because that does level the playing field when you don't just look at concentration of poverty. But I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. If you're going to look at long-term solutions, you got to start early, and that starts before kindergarten. That starts at the preschool level and assuring that we got a level playing field for everyone.
I just want to go a slightly different direction for a minute. English language learners. There's a growing population of children for whom English is not their first language. And historically, these children's needs have not been met. They've been put in special education or something else because their language isn't quite where it needs to be. Are there some different strategies that we should consider for getting these kids language ready for the expectations so that they can learn and learn English at the same time?
Yeah, and you know, first of all, there is a there's a concern out there. I've talked to parents who said that their children, you know, when their English isn't their first language, there's a myth or an assumption that says, oh, well, maybe they're behind their peers. What do we know about special education services? First of all, it's not a placement, it's not a child, it's not a program, it is a service. Special education and or related services is what the federal law has said to states you need to provide children and youth with disabilities who according to their unique and individualized needs and how it relates to their education, especially that standard piece of it, right? That we're getting them the extra help and services they need. Well, the only way to get to that is if you're doing a true evaluation. So if our means testing on a child isn't related to their home language or whatever their first language is, you're going to have some discrepancies in that. And it goes back to when Head Start started to do some standardized testing without regard to somebody's background or where they're from, who they are, examples, then you're not going to get a level playing field or a good snapshot of what their unique needs are. And so first of all, I think it's got to tie back to how are we evaluating the individual to determine whether or not they qualify or benefit for special education or related services, number one. Number two, why are we doing that? Why are we seeing those youth that might come in with their English as a second language, ESL, going into the special education services world? Well, if that's the case, then let's back that up and say our investment needs to be on qualified teachers or qualified help that are going to understand the unique needs of that child, where they're from as far as a family, whether they be right here, fresh. And here's the thing I like about Minnesota in Article 13 of our state constitution. I just arrived from Bolivia, or I just arrived from Russia, or I just arrived from wherever I come, right? Guess what I get to do in Minnesota the next day? I have a right to a free public education. Isn't that huge? That's why Minnesota ranks number one in so many categories when it comes to education. And isn't it great that it's a constitutional right? So with that, I think we need to just take a step back and say, well, how are we evaluating these guys? That's a big question I think the Department of Ed should take a look at.
Well, and that said, do you think then that teachers need further training in cultural competency, considering the vast diversity of the students that we have in our education system, and that 1 in 6 kids has a foreign-born parent? My own kids have friends whose parents are from Kenya, and I forget, all over the world though. And so, you know, there's a lot more backgrounds coming into the classroom, a lot more knowledge of the world.
Yeah, and you know, you bring up a good point. Dr. Tawara Goody, who's from Georgetown University, when I was on the Federal Interagency Coordinating Council, they had really looked at cultural competencies, especially as it relates to families. And the paradigm that occurs is, how are you looking at the cultural competencies, right? It's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to really understand it. She's got some great work out there, especially when you're talking about kids that might have English second language and kids with disabilities, when it comes to how is that all interrelated. She's a wonderful researcher, a wonderful opportunity for people to look at the work that she's done there and apply it to the state. And I know she's been to Minnesota a few times with the Department of Public Health. Issaroon had her in just last year. But it's folks like that who understand truly what the cultural competency pieces mean on that. And if we're looking at that from that perspective, then yeah, you're right. You need to understand that piece of it. So let's get somebody in here to help us understand the culture. Don't just say cultural competencies and not really apply it to, well, what does that mean? That really truly looks at the individual, not to fit my paradigm, but how am I addressing my ability to teach or talk or react to somebody according to the paradigm that they're in. It goes back to early childhood. Orlena Puckett Institute really took a look at understanding parents and families and children, and they did a survey with the home visitors that were walking around. This was in the 80s, and they really pushed, well, what is it that you want? And the home visitors, who were teachers and educators and public health people, had their own little set of criteria that they had. And they asked the parents, some first time here in the United States, North Carolina, little area, regional area, but what do you want as parents when it comes to dealing with helping your child, help giving skills, right, early on? They wanted to be listened to, valued, and respected. So these first 3 intangibles that came into play, and it really kind of set the whole world. And you look at the research that was done then by Donce, Trivet, and Deal, and started in the 80s and 90s, and it was supporting and strengthening families. And there's some great work that's there, great work that I think has rolled into where we're going.
Senator Hoffman, we have to end there, but thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for letting me be here. And wish we could go for some more minutes.
Me too. how Minnesota manages the increasingly diverse younger population has implications for the future economy of the state. And joining me in the studio to provide his point of view on the changing demographics is Senator Eric Pratt of Prior Lake. Welcome, Senator.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Educational disparities have been broadly reported in Minnesota. Considering the changing demographics, the increase in diverse population, do you think addressing these problems is best done at the school board level or the state level or both?
I think it's both. And what we as a state need to do is figure out from a policy standpoint, what can we do to enable our local boards to enact and really put into place programs that will increase teacher diversity or meet the needs of diverse populations. Because when we talk about diverse populations, they're not the same. In my district, I have a large Hispanic and Russian population. In some other districts, we have Somali. In some other districts, we have your traditional African American populations, and they all have different needs. And so I think trying not to micromanage at the state level, but to allow local boards to meet the needs of their communities is most important.
Some students enter school with language barriers. They come from other cultures. They have to learn English on top of the regular curriculum. What kinds of concessions should be made? How should we address getting them up to level without putting them in special education or separating them, keeping them inclusive?
That's a really good question, and it's a very difficult one to take, because even in a small district like Prior Lake Savage, I guess not so small anymore, but when it was small, we were having to address over 70 different languages of students coming in. And so it's not as if you have a large cohort that you can kind of bring together through one wave, but you're really addressing the individual needs of the students with a teacher that may or may not be able to communicate in that language. We've got some terrific nonprofit partners. Down in my area, we have one called the Shakopee Diversity Alliance, which is working with the schools and families to help with that communication barrier, not only just from the language aspect, but from also the cultural aspect. Because when these people come, when we have people moving into our communities from other countries, the cultures, what they expect from schools, how they push back or advocate for their children is different than it was in their home countries. And so I appreciate the work that they're doing, and I think we've got to have more of those public nonprofit partnerships.
So that kind of leads to the question about, cultural competency. With so many different cultures coming together in the classroom, do you think that there should be an increased emphasis among teachers for cultural competency-based training so that they can pull from different types of learning, types of languages, types of cultures, and bring it all together? Do you think that's a positive step?
I think it is positive. I'll take my experience from the business community, where we're doing a lot of training on, for guys my age, how we deal with the younger generation. Managing millennials is a whole lot different than managing the Generation X guys that I am. So it doesn't matter what group of people you're talking to. If there's a difference in experience, then you've got to be able to communicate in that way and understand what motivates someone. I mean, that's basic management. That's basic business. Along that line, I also think we have to look at our curriculum and allow school boards the flexibility to, and that's why we put school boards in charge of curriculum, and that's why I've been fighting to have fewer state mandates, because I want kids to see themselves in their curriculum. I want it to connect with them. We can have basic American history, but if we can supplement that with, in Minneapolis, let's say it's African American history. If we can supplement that with talking about the struggles of immigrants in past decades or centuries, I think that helps kids link experience and education and really shows the importance, and it gets them interested enough to continue forward.
So you'd like local school boards to actually be able to shape the curricula a little bit more than maybe is currently the standard. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Well, I think they've got a good, I think local school boards have great breadth in what they can do today. What I don't want to do is tighten that by putting new mandates on them.
Okay. How can the state recognize that family incomes also have an effect in how kids do in school? Kids with lower socioeconomic background tend to not do quite as well as their peers who come from wealthier backgrounds. What can we do about that?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First of all, it all starts at the family, and hopefully the family is supporting the children in their education. If the family's not supporting them, we're going to have a hard time getting that child to move forward and really value the education that we're providing them. I think part of it, though, is that we do, in fact, have failing school districts. And we've got kids who are trapped in these districts and with very few choices. And so I've actually been working on a plan that would allow kids in the lower economic stratuses where their schools are failing, more opportunities to move out, more choices. Because what we find is that it's great to say we have open enrollment and choice, but we don't address the barriers. We don't address transportation. We don't address special needs. All these things that maybe keep a child stuck in a failing school. And so if we can open up some of those opportunities for families to engage and realize that their child can be successful in school, and we can help them remove some of those barriers, then I think we'll see more effective outreach programs and more effective use of our open enrollment.
How important are pre-K programs in terms of getting kids ready for school, do you think?
I think pre-K programs are important. I put both of my children through pre-K programs. I don't think it's for every child. Every child matures at a different rate. But I think it's important. And I think it's important that parents find the right program for their child. If we have a stay-at-home mom or a stay-at-home dad and they work with that child a couple of hours a day, I think that's terrific. If they want to put them in a center for a half a day or a full day, I think that's terrific. If they want to put them in, I've seen Scott County Family Child Care do some terrific things with curriculum as they're getting kids ready for kindergarten in a much more intimate space. And so we need to have those choices. You'd like to leave it up to the parents, though, ultimately? Ultimately, I think it has to be the parent's choice because no child is the same.
Sure. Senator Pratt, we have to stop today, but thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Tune in again next week for conversations on policing and racial tensions in Minnesota. From all of us at Senate Media Services, thanks for watching.